Greetings and welcome to Epic Narrates. I am Epic. Today, a tale from the gods. As always, we ask that you like and subscribe. A small thing for you that means the world to us. Thank you for your support. And now, we begin.
Markus was a normal man. He was just like everyone else. He had no secrets. He had no exciting stories. He had no dark past. What he did have was a rather remarkable pair of fates. The first fate was that of protection. The second is known as luck. The fate known as protection does just what you might think. It protects the mortals under its care. The fate protection is not all-powerful, but is quite handy to have looking over you. The only problem is that protection is a busy fate. They never even have time to go to any of the parties the other fates throw. Protection needs a break. The issue with protection is that it doesn't work the way people think it does. When something goes terribly wrong and danger bypasses by the slimmest margin, that is not protection. That's luck. What protection does is to give you a bit of a nudge away from risk long before it manifests. Protection will make you notice your shoe is untied at just the right moment as to make you miss the next green light at the crosswalk. If you have a low willpower, you will stop and bend over and tie your shoe. If you are willful, you might blow off the loose lace and continue your forward track. You then arrive to the green crosswalk light. As you proceed to cross the street, you get run over by a vehicle that failed to respect the sanctity of the traffic signal. The last thoughts that drift through your mind is amazement that someone's amputated leg is skittering aimlessly down the street behind the car, and a vague puzzlement as to why an automotive tire is getting so close to your face. If protection is on your side at your time of need, you will never know it was there. Luck, on the other hand, is possessed by a wild streak and a penchant for flair and drama. Luck likes to be boisterous and far too flamboyant for its own good, for luck believes there is no point in its efforts if no one is aware it acted. Luck will rush in at the last moment and perform all manner of crazy shit. Luck will make the bullet meant for one individual strike an insect while it is in transit to the unsuspecting target. As a consequence, instead of the would-be target's brains being sprayed all over their equally unawares family while having a lovely little picnic in the park, the bullet will be deflected just enough by the hapless insect to hurtle past you and blindly into the unknown. Will it strike a tree? A car? Or does some other soul get to become a statistic? This too is the hand of luck. Luck is peculiar in that way, giving freely to one while shunning another. The difficulty that presented itself to Mark is that luck and protection have an adversarial relationship. They are, after all, diametrically opposed on a philosophical level. That is where Mark ran into trouble. Mark, before his creation, was given his fates at random by the hand that creates, as all mortals are. He grew up a normal child. He went to school and became a dental hygienist. He met a girl, not beautiful but not offensive either. They had 2 bland children and lived in a house that is perhaps best described as vanilla. He drove a car with a neutral tone and 4 spacious doors. His wife got fat, he put on weight, and they stopped procreating as neither found the other attractive. The children aged and began dabbling in soft, though illicit drugs and sex, at ages younger than one might expect. They were a perfect fit for the suburb, an HOA they inhabited. In short, they were utterly unremarkable. As the years progressed, they lost what little adventurous spirit they had once possessed. They set aside the progressive attitudes of youth as the repetition of a stagnant and empty existence eroded their very spirits. They became more conservative and closed-minded with each new year. His wife became what is colloquially known as a Karen. Mark remained wholly ignorant of the transition. He just knew that his opinion was more valid than anyone else's, and Karen frequently parroted his own viewpoints in all matters of import. In time, she became an extension of Mark himself. As such, any insult, real or imagined, became an assault against himself. Any modicum of resistance became an unforgivable challenge to his authority. An authority that in his mind and righteous opinion was absolute. In short, they sucked. Like bag of dicks sucked. As in a giant bag of dicks that dripped a fluid too unpleasant to contemplate, on a hot and humid day. That didn't stop Mark from finding success. Far from it. With no real will of his own, Mark blundered through life from one moment to the next, unable to resist the gentle guiding hand of protection. This left luck in a rather restricted possession. Luck could provide Mark with all the good luck he wanted to, but protection would always keep Mark from stumbling into anything that might give luck a chance to issue the spicier varieties of their offerings, after decades of this luck had reached the absolute limits of tolerance. A condition that few could fail to understand or appreciate. For luck always seeks balance in its dealings. Restricted as they were, luck could offer only the beneficial aspects of itself. As a result, over the many years, the great imbalance had formed. This manifested itself as pain and need from the perspective of luck. An insatiable itch and a boundless, gnawing hunger tormented the fate endlessly. Thusly, luck wanted nothing more than to rectify what was in its eyes an abomination. And to do so with the zeal and vigor that could only be born from decades of ceaseless torment. Mark was on his allotted lunch. He had just read a fascinating and insightful article that argued a single group was responsible for most of the abortions in the world. It further stated that a simple and expedient solution to the abortion problem would be to force sterilize all of the, quote, minorities and immigrants. Mark had found himself agreeing with many of the well-argued points and had resolved to support any legislation that lead to that end. When he noticed it was time to return to his office, Mark was excited to get back to work. It contained the three things he loved most in the world. Causing pain, mouth stuff, as he described it when they discussed such things in the past, and an attractive assistant that desperately needed the job and thusly was unable to say no. Mark neglected to mention this particular aspect of his practice to his wife. He stood and walked out of the delicatessen, not bothering to dispose of his empty cup or soiled food wrapper. That was when protection came to me. Oh, I forgot you don't know who or what I am. I am not a fate. I am a hand. We are akin to bosses of the fates, however, like any good organization, we exist to support our underlings. I am the Hand of Foreknowledge. Some simply call me Forehand for short. I don't just see the future, but all possible futures in an endlessly progressing collapse of probabilities. The fates are possessed by a singular drive of such savage tenacity that the entirety of their being is consumed with the desire to exercise their skills in effecting the mortal realm. The hands, rather less so. I find it difficult to care greatly about the fates. As such, the goo bags below even the fates register but the faintest flicker of recognition. Sadly for you, there is one aspect of your existence that garners a modicum of interest. I am always amazed at the number of things you all try to procreate with. Living, dead, inanimate, or mechanized. It's acceptably entertaining when you get creative and begin combining various aspects of the aforementioned categories in new and exciting ways. The most delightful aspect is perhaps when those that survive you find your core after an orgasmic misadventure becomes excessive. Kicked to death by a surprised farm animal. 10 points, blood loss involving an adventurous object. 4 points. Blood loss during the surgery to remove the aforementioned adventurous object. 4 points. If the object had once been alive, 6 points. If it's still alive, 12 points. Bonus points will be awarded if you manage to simultaneously carradine yourself. I admit that I still find considerable humor in the memory of the triple man sandwich incident. Frankly, it astounds me. How did they believe, so very erroneously, that an object of such stunning proportions would fit in the location they had intended. And if they had succeeded where none had before, what precisely was the intended application of a device with such a remarkable configuration? I digress. Protection came to me to ask questions of the future, as is his custom. I showed them several futures with high probabilities, and they paid in services, as is also the custom of Protection. Knowledge in hand, Protection raced away to the side of Mark. There he found, frozen in time, a plump man only just rising from a filth-covered table. His belly frozen mid-jiggle, post-collision with the edge of the table. Protection noted absently that the buttons on his shirt would be unable to withstand the stresses placed upon them for very much longer. Protection looked outside and noticed a young girl on a skateboard sailing merrily along the sidewalk. Protection noticed an ant on the cement. Protection reached out and froze the mind of the tiny creature, stopping it in its tracks. Satisfied, Protection moved on to other duties. Mark was unable to detect Protection when they arrived. He could not see them as they worked. No mortal can. And so he was unaware what was coming as the flow of time resumed, and he made his way to the door. A young man with a striking beard said something to Mark about the state he had left the table from behind the counter. To which Mark thumbed over his shoulder, saying words to the effect of how young people needed to stop being lazy and actually work to earn their pay, and how life has no handouts. Mark knew he had scored major social points from the looks on the faces of the people in the line that filled the space in front of the counter. Clearly they all felt the same way, but simply needed someone strong and brave enough as Mark to put a voice to the sentiment. In fact, those that heard Mark's words had arrived at a very different emotional, moral, and social conclusion than Mark believed they had. It would have made no impact to Mark had he known this, however. He had never suffered the bad luck of making an objectionable proclamation in the presence of an individual that cared enough to force a confrontation over the issue. Fucking sheep, Mark thought to himself as he flung the door open with an alarming violence. Much to Mark's surprise, the door closed almost at once. Far more forcefully than he had managed to open it. So forceful, in fact, that the glass shattered and sprayed all around him, glistening fire the now disturbed midday air as it did so. A blur of tanned flesh and long blonde hair shot through his field of vision, accompanied by a hollow rolling sound. A yelp of surprise that could only belong to an attractive female filled the air before being cut short with a wet crunch and the shrill cry of a car alarm. The actions of Protection had come to fruition, as they always did for Mark. Luck had frozen the hapless insect in place long enough to cause the young woman on the skateboard to strike it, crushing the poor creature beneath its brightly colored wheels. This was enough to induce a slight drag to one side. This was in no way a threat to the rider, and in fact went wholly unnoticed. It was, however, just enough to divert the young woman from a path clear of debris and onto one that intersected a small stone. Though only about the size of a pea, the offending geological outcast was enough to cause the rider to lose balance for but a moment. Sadly, with luck in play, the loss of control happened at just the right, or perhaps wrong, moment. Temporarily diverted, she found herself presented with a suddenly opened door directly in her path. With mild interest, Mark looked to the source of the odd sounds. There on the ground lay a young woman. Her naked legs were just the right mix of hard athleticism and softness of the funner sex, Mark thought to himself. Her hair that had flown freely and danced a careless, wild waltz in the wind mere moments ago, was now splayed discordantly and lied still against the concrete. The only place it retained motion was over the mouth of the young woman, as ragged spurts of foamy blood forced their way between her ruined lips in an attempt to escape her slowly filling lungs. Some hair found itself ripped from the young girl and affixed with blood and skin to the corner of the noisy car. It took but a moment for the studied eye of the dental hygienist to detect that something was very wrong indeed with the young girl. The hair on her face did not rise up and over a petite nose. It did not flow gently over a shapely chin. Below the eyes it simply sagged and dipped into a cavity of crushed bone and viscera where these features once were. Never one to pass on an opportunity, Mark jogged as gracefully as his ponderous bulk would allow. The unpleasant undulation of flesh, the gentle slap of his breasts, and the chafing of seldom viewed anatomical locations were nothing compared to the rewards in store for him. Of that he was sure. When he reached the young woman, the ruin that was her face was a glorious sight to behold. Teeth protruded grotesquely through the skin of her lips and cheeks at odd angles. The pale pink of virgin bone could be seen between open wounds in the flesh, between the gouts of foamy blood spewing from the ruined maw that, but moments ago, had been a beautiful face possessed of youth. Moving quickly, Mark knelt down next to the tiny form and gently rolled her onto her side. As he did so, with a single great spasm, the body in his hands convulsed, expelling a considerable mass of frothy blood and chunks of tissue onto the sidewalk, easing her breathing considerably. Mark reached into his pocket with one hand, having been careful not to contaminate himself with the fluids of the girl. From within the folds he pulled forth the only tool he felt was appropriate for the situation: his business card. With a deft hand he placed the slender slip of paper into her back pocket, believing it more likely to avoid an unfortunate crease in that location than if it had been placed in its more forward-facing brethren. He was all too aware that the young girl would be in need of his services for some time to come. Assuming she had good insurance, the distasteful indignities he had suffered to this point would be well worth the expenditure. As his fingers grazed the gentle arc of her backside, he could not prohibit himself from taking note of the tender perfection of the curve, and spare a moment of lust-filled regret at the passing of his own youth. Without warning, the body of the stricken girl stiffened and began to shake both violently and protractedly. Having finished what he had set out to do, and having no interest in dealing with what obviously was no concern of his, he quickly placed her on her back again, though far less gently than he had done when he initially rolled her over, her head repeatedly rebounding off the unyielding cement. As he did so, another woman ran up explaining that she was a paramedic and quickly took control of the situation, enlisting the help of others even as Mark retreated from the scene. Luck was not unaware of this incident. In fact, Luck had been in attendance. The young woman was under his charge as well as Mark. She had been a dancer. She had excelled in science, genetics, to be more precise. She had loved and been loved. She would never again think in words. She had also fallen victim to protection. She was not the first to fall at the hand of Mark under the influence of protection. Nor was she the first charge of Luck to be extinguished under such circumstance. Luck formed a plan to guarantee she would be the last to suffer such an encounter. If protection had not intervened, Mark would have suffered a nasty bruise to the leg and an ache in his wrist. The girl would have been largely unscathed. Why protection had such an affinity for so loathsome a creature as Mark was unfathomable to Luck. Luck has one thing that protection does not. One aspect that they can exploit that protection is not afforded. That ability is the exercise of patience. Where protection must act, Luck can bide their time. Where protection is forced to action, Luck may express apathy. And so Luck came to me seeking the same knowledge that protection desires. As with all others, Luck was shown the collapsing futures through my power. Then Luck did something I had forgotten they could do. Luck used luck upon themselves. This is not without cost. Nor is it as effective as it otherwise would have been in the mortal realm. However, it was enough. And in that moment protection was trapped as Luck had been for so many years. It was early morning. The house Mark lived in was on the outskirts of town, surrounded by fields of grain, fields that were themselves hemmed in by gentle mounds waist tall to guard against flooding. The school bus had just departed, his 2 children on board. Mark was just finishing his breakfast when Luck set to action their plan. 8 miles away, Luck broke a stick. A small stick, to be sure, even as such things go. It was, however, enough. The delicate snap raced out in the cool morning air and startled a single bird to flight. Seeing a member of the flock springing skyward and calling out a shriek of surprised warning, the rest of the flock quickly followed suit. While normally such an action is prudent in the face of an unknown predator, in this situation, a less fortunate decision could not have been made. The flock raced toward the heavens. Each had one eye on those around them and another furiously scoured the ground and foliage for the source of the offense. Sadly, this left the flock unaware of the approaching aircraft. With a bang that shook windows for over a mile and a great belch of fire and smoke, the wide-body cargo plane consumed the majority of the flock. With 3 of its 4 engines ablaze and the 4th dying a wheezing death, the fate of the mighty craft was now sealed before it had even truly taken off. Mark was sitting in his bland automobile, with its above-average resale value, at the end of his driveway. Just as he was beginning to pull out, a glint of metal caught his eye from down the road. Protection had acted to draw his attention to this anomaly. Mark waited, curious. In the anemic light of a pre-dawn fall morning, a vague shape could be seen lumbering down the road with its lights off. Incensed, Mark reached for his phone. The car drew closer. The uneven patter of an ill-maintained engine and its broken exhaust had found itself in a running battle against the loud and tasteless music the driver had elected to pit against it. The driver sang and bounced along, neither in time with the engine nor the music, for their mind was so small as to be unable to reconcile the two disparate sounds. The result was a discordant undulation within the vehicle they were driving, and an almost absolute absence of awareness regarding their surroundings. The vehicle drew nearer, the sound grew louder. Mark's anger grew. When the rolling cacophony that was a 1997 Dodge Grand Caravan at last lumbered past Mark at the end of his driveway, he was treated to a sensory feast of an unfamiliar nature. The most popular and vapid song of the day blared mockingly over the radio. The rusted holes in the dented body insulted him. The trash bag that served as a rear window slung insults in his direction, so incensed that such an object would be permitted not only within his view but within direct proximity to his house, that Mark shut down. The proper term is sensory overload paralysis. This was not an uncommon occurrence to Mark, as up to this moment such lapses were permissible under the watchful eye of protection. As a consequence, these moments of frozen inaction were a familiar indulgence. Mark never had cause to notice the absence of vigilance. Regrettably, in this moment, for the first time in his unremarkable life, Mark was being forced to rely on his own inherent skills. Skills that had not enjoyed the opportunity to atrophy under the tender guidance of protection, for they had never been allowed to initially develop. Luck had played a numbers game. While the loss of the birds was inconsequential, the loss of the only two people on the flight, the pilot and co-pilot, would be far less so. For they were both charges of protection. And so a choice had to be made. With its engines non-functional, the aircraft glided as gracefully as physics would allow. The skill of those in command rose to rarefied heights in this moment of stress. Identified an open field as a likely landing zone, and with deft hands guided their stricken machine for the only location they could reach that offered even the faintest promise of limited salvation. When the aircraft made initial contact with the field of grain, the low-hanging and oversized engines ripped from the wings, tumbling and grinding their way along between the fuel-laden underside of the wing and the soft, loamy soil below. None of the dancers in this waltz of destruction were willing to accept a subsidiary role, and so fought against one another. This permitted a single outcome: breathtaking destruction. A destruction whose scope was matched only by its thoroughness. Burdened with cargo and sufficient fuel for a transcontinental flight, the aircraft, tattered though it had become, was reluctant to stop, though its speed had been reduced greatly. Powerless though they were, the crew found themselves facing 3 obstacles. The first was a low berm, only about waist high. The second obstacle took the form of a decrepit minivan traveling illuminated in the dark. Finally, the third point of concern was an oblivious dental hygienist that was irate at being confronted with another individual that was not himself. Dimly, Mark became aware that something had changed. As full awareness slowly crept its way into Mark's consciousness, so did the sound of well-tended soil being rapidly displaced. The moment Mark managed to turn his head towards the field in front of him, he discovered, much to his surprise, a construct of disquieting proportions mere feet from striking the berm across the road. As the aircraft struck said berm, the frontmost section of the aircraft tore free and deflected away from Mark and his fedora conveyance of distilled banality. Without the heavier aft portion of the aircraft pushing it, the forwardmost section quickly came to a stop, its occupants miraculously unharmed. The main body, however, would into its existence. Sending a wave of earth skyward, the aft section tore through the berm as though it was but an ephemeral imagining. The boiling torrent of earth preceded the body proper and in a stroke of true luck pushed the immobile sedan back without undue injury to the lone occupant. However, the now unrestrained cargo carried on a short distance farther and was rather less forgiving. A pallet of skateboards broke free of its restraints and then hurtled into the car. 5 managed to penetrate the interior of the car and greatly reduced its resale value. 3 destroyed the passenger seat and scattered themselves about the rear and trunk. The 4th embedded itself in the center console, coming to a rest nearly vertically. Somewhat sadly, in the shock of seeing a plane crash directly in front of him, Mark had grabbed that same console. The offending piece of sporting equipment now pinned him firmly in place as it had managed to slide between the bones of his forearm as it passed through flesh and muscle. This was of little concern to Mark, for the 5th skateboard had bisected his left arm just above the elbow before embedding itself into the door frame and pillar so forcefully that the disparate parts were now twisted and permanently bound together. Mark looked in shock at the deformed segment of plywood sticking out of his right arm and experienced fantastic pain at the slightest movement. He reached with his left arm to extract himself, only to at last discover its absence. A flash of anger burned through him as his blood sprayed across the interior of the car. He was going to pay to have it cleaned. Certainly not him, he assured himself. A great rush of wind tore through the shattered windows, preceding a stifling heat that seemed to suck the air from the space. The dancing orange light that can signify only one thing tinted the world in a warm glow and chased away the remains of the receding night. Any thoughts Mark intended to share with anyone within shouting distance were lost to the roar of the flames. Indeed, as the pilots extracted themselves from the battered cockpit, they were unable to even detect the smallest indication that would have suggested the final fate of Mark. He had a brief window of time in which he might have been helped, had anyone known to help him. While it is true that his wife was in the house and had been very much aware that her husband was at the outskirts of the disaster, sadly she was no longer in possession of that information. When the aircraft hit the berm, many components were dislodged. One of them happened to be an element of the locking mechanism for the forward cargo door. Once liberated from the airframe, it had skittered along the yard and deflected off a decoration before shattering a window. A window that the wife of Mark had been standing behind. It burst her right eye on its way towards the back of her skull. Even before it had stopped, sticking proudly out both the front and rear, she had lost the ability to ever again think in words. Standing unseen among the debris, protection and luck took in the destruction around them. Looking to luck, protection held their arms out with palms up and shook their head, the unasked question obvious between them. Luck shrugged and smiled in reply before flitting away to see to their next task. There are many fates and many hands. We all have our stories.
If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe. Comments below are always welcome and are a major algorithmic boost. A free way to support the channel as we grow and struggle from our birthing crib. Feel free to check out our Discord or swing by our Ko-fi if you feel we are worthy of your direct support. Links in the description below.